Okay, we're going to kick off a fabulous fellows reading in a second. Just one quick announcement. Members of the O'Brien Heron Workshop, you guys are meeting half an hour earlier today. FYI. And without any further ado, Molly Dektar. Woo!
Okay. Good morning. Thank you all for joining me this morning. I'm going to start by reading from my novel that came out 3 months ago, and then I'm going to read seven very short stories that I've written this July. My novel's titled The Ashe Family. And this is just the very start. Bay and I approached the farm at dawn. The first sun churned sideways through the trees, catching in the previous day's rain, which the wind now shook down from the Carolina silver bells, the beeches, and the poplars. I rolled down the window and heard the forest fizzing. Bay had taught me one of their songs in the car. Come, my soul, and let us try for a little season. Every burden to lay by, come and let us reason. He sang the harmony and drummed his thumbs on the wheel. I couldn't hold the melody, and my voice kept slipping. Before I met Dice, before I met Queen and Pear, he was the whole Ashe family to me, and I promised him, my soul with which I would try. We repeated the song till I could maintain my line. When we turned off the paved road, the low sun lit up every strand of his hair, so that as a result of its extreme disorder, it looked like a giant bright halo. He had rescued me, I thought. Bay drove maybe a mile more up a road so bumpy that my head kept hitting the ceiling. We passed 4 signs warning hunters not to come near. Beware, large dogs. Here, he said, we're here. In an instant, the gold light broke, and here was my first view of the farm. The house crouched in a whirl of yellow leaves from the biggest hickory I'd ever seen. The wind spun the leaves in the air as thick and self-contained as the liquid in a snow globe. I felt like my eyes were failing. I stumbled out of the car. Bay took my hand. I'd gotten a splinter in it the day before, and I felt like he'd shoved a stake through my palm. A light went on in the house. On our trip up through the mountains, Bay had told me that I could stay at the farm for 3 days or the rest of my life. His family, intentional family, not born family, sustained itself communally off the grid in the old way. This was the real world, he explained, and if I stayed, I'd get a real world name to replace my fake world one. He said I would come to understand that there is no definite self. In the Ashe family, there was no selfishness, so there were no possessions, no children, and no couples. What if I stay longer than 3 days but want to leave after, I said. Why would you want to leave when you'll have more freedom here than anywhere else, he said. The family's father, Bay said, was Dice, and Dice would understand me the way a lightning bolt would understand a rod. I was ready to believe it, all of it. Bay could see, as no one else had, the yearning I felt for a more essential life. To me, essential meant a life more connected to wild nature. I'd always known there was magic on the margins. There was a world beyond my mother's world, where a dinner that went off without a hitch meant a dinner where no one talked about anything that mattered. My mother cared about manners and appearances, and above all, she wanted me to go to college so I would have a better future. She wanted a life of safety for me, as though safety were still possible on the choked earth. Safety was a relic from before humans destroyed the world. Some part of my mother was riven. I kept stumbling along the edges. Once my ex-boyfriend and I had found a broken-down shotgun in her dresser drawer. My ex-boyfriend Isaac told me that my desire for a more essential life was meaningless unless I was fleeing from and fleeing toward. I'd had so much trouble discerning the toward. I was looking for the toward. Then I met Bay. Next to him, in the yellow-winged morning, it seemed to me that everyone in Durham had told me just what I'd needed to leave them behind. The hickory leaves pattered against our backs and adhered to the house's clapboards. Will I meet Dice now, I said. Not for a little while, I think, said Bay. Let the fake world fall away. His arm was around me, and I watched his breath enter the air. The cold had broken records for September. I didn't know where I would sleep, what I would eat. I had no money and no possessions. 3 days or the rest of my life, I thought. We stood listening to the leaves, the sheep's plaintive calls, the cow's exasperated moos. A white dog loped toward me. It was huge, almost my height, and butted its head into my chest. Let me see your watch, Bay said. I held out my arm. He unbound the watch from my wrist and slipped it into his pocket. I liked the feathery feeling of his fingers on my arm. Then he pulled away from me. Stay, he said, as he walked into the house. At first, I thought he was talking to the dog. I stood alone in the courtyard under the shedding yellow tree. I could hear a whippoorwill in the creaking trunks of trees. Across from the house, the L-shaped barn filled up my vision from end to end, dim against the glare of the sky, so its detail only gradually appeared. A dusky bronze color with a tiny tower on one end, topped with a tin wind arrow slowly turning. Between house and barn, there was a storage house on crooked slate stilts with a triangle roof like a child's drawing. Mountain slopes rose on two sides, holding the buildings like a folded palm, what I would come to know as the holler. It was all tidier than I'd imagined and older. I'd expected tarped buses and pelt teepees leaning in the woods, but this was a quiet, old-fashioned farm tucked into standard pastures. The wind streamed down the slopes, eddying and rumpling in the longleaf pines and on the weather vane, so that it turned this way and that, not indicating anything. That's the first half of my reading. So for the second half, since I published my first novel, I've been looking for new things to write about, and it's difficult and the well feels very dry. So I set a challenge with my friend Eve Gleichman, who's a great writer, to each day, each of us would write 1 2-paragraph short story, and then we shared them with each other for 30 days. And I recommend this challenge to everyone who's running out of ideas, because you have to keep going. And I'll read just a few of those 2-paragraph stories, and some of them I wrote here at Sewanee. 1, free audiobook. I got 1 free audiobook for downloading the app, so I downloaded Middlemarch, which is 35 hours and 38 minutes. Trying to listen to this audiobook has exposed the extreme intermittency of my ability to pay attention. As it turns out, 50% of my walking time is about the world, and 50% is about something that everyone told me is not worth my time and consideration. It goes like this. The baronet offers Dorothea a tiny puppy. She rejects the gift. Why didn't you call when you said you would? I waited for you with my phone 2 inches from my face for hours. 3 presses on the back 30 seconds button. Strangely, the baronet didn't give the puppy to Cecilia. Should I tell you how much of my life is in a holding pattern because of the way you treat me? Do you realize it? I'm sure you don't, but if I tell you, will you drop me? 3 presses on the back 30 seconds button. 2, immunity. The playground was dark and empty. Then a man came running out of the basketball court, and behind him the rocket went up and produced a huge boom and no visual. The noise rattled off of all the apartment buildings, making the neighborhood sound metallic and empty. I looked around urgently because I didn't know if people had started other dark rockets on the street. I ran back to my building. On the next street, men set out the fireworks on the double yellow line. They lit the bases of the vertical rods, and the fuse fire fluffed out along the street. The cars kept going down the street, and the rockets flew up inches away from them and exploded in strips, ferns, clusters, and screws. The men yelled at a bus driver, and a woman hustled her children out of the way, and a sprinkler wave of white sparks shot up 3 times higher than the buildings. When they all started shouting, "Get back, get back," that was the best, since I was right on the immunity border. 3, my mother. Last year, when my mother was taking her daily walk around the neighborhood, 2 massive dogs ran down the hill and jumped up on her. She was terrified and screaming. The dog's owner arrived. "They're just puppies, they're just playful," he said, and scolded my mother for her anger. When she asked him to keep them on a leash, he said, "They didn't hurt you." This story makes me side against dogs. I used to love dogs, from the squeaky tiny ones to the big tumorous ones. I loved strolling around Manhattan, being proximal to a huge array of dogs. Now I think of my mother, who has taken to walking around the neighborhood with one of my dad's golf clubs. I'm glad to have this surprising reminder of my love for her. We're not a very affectionate family. 4, self-awareness. The grocery store near my apartment has plastic strips for a door. I really like going in and out of the plastic strips. When I'm alone, they feel good, exciting somehow, and I like the flippy noise they make and how the light bends on them and breaks around me. When there are other people going in or out, we lift them up for each other. I'm alone almost all of the time, but when I'm not alone, I'm getting excited for when I'll be alone again. For someone who spends so much time alone, I'm not very self-aware. I can tell that I'm not very self-aware because when I look into the future, I have no idea whether this will prove to be a phase or the shape of my life permanently. But all it takes is a cloudburst or a dark firework going off right over my head for me to feel utterly distracted by the fact that I'm alive. 5, walking. I walk to the road after reading, listening to Middlemarch. Rosie wants to enslave Lydgate. The brand of nail clippers was drugstore. A pack of Sonomas for $3.33, a pack of Eagle 20s for $3.37. A man showed me a photo of hibiscus. Beauty even in the brambles, he said, and looked at me to hammer it home. Mary Garth says no to Fred, the first time in the book that someone seems willing to try to change someone else, to imagine the counterfactual. Deer in the fields, their bulky bodies and alien-shaped heads. Deer with small antlers, the rain and sun, the rainbow in the net, the steam off the asphalt as high as houses. The horses roll around on their backs in the straw. They're hot in their fancy fields. The goats come up to the fence and swing their ears bashfully. The butterflies fly as high as birds on occasion. The frogs are so incredibly loud, and as soon as you shine a flashlight on them, they clam up and hide. The armadillos look like gleaming little piglets. The bats have a frantic flap to them. 6, beloved things. If there's one thing I love, it's shopping online for a Victorian-style nightgown. If there's one thing I love, it's being able, materially and physically, to nap. If there's one thing I love, it's bright, fragrant flowers in my vase on my writing desk. If there's one thing I love, it's the long, idle conversations at work precisely when we should not be idle. If there's one thing I love, it's hiding during the event and eating chocolate. If there's one thing I love, it's sitting there in the hot grass while the little blue-eyed goats wander over, eating as they go, then touching my hands with their noses. If there's one thing I love, it's the thick, cold mist, its endowments of rain up over the huge lawn. Well, not just the mist, but running into it, getting eaten by it, an echoing zone of white like in The Matrix or The Yellow Submarine, the white imaginary land. If there's one thing I love, it's when I'm too distraught to talk, but you call me over and over, and I know that you know, and neither of us are tired. I hung up on you to enter the mist, because neither of us were tired. Last one, 7, on writing. If you need something to do in a group, you can divide people into Lord of the Rings creatures. Elf, human, dwarf, hobbit. You can also divide people 3 by 3 along lawful, neutral, chaotic, and good, neutral, evil. And the center is true, neutral. When you're talking about people who aren't there, you can do marry, fuck, kill. But that's difficult. That's difficult for me because I want to fucking kill everyone. In pairs, it's easier. You can choose any set of things and decide who is who. You're obviously the spoon, I'm the fork. You're the salt, I'm the pepper. You're the cat, I'm the dog. With writers you know fairly well, you can do a version of this that's easy, which is, what writer would you be friends with? With writers you know a bit better, you can ask, what writer would you be? The hardest and most interesting version of this, however, reserved only for the widely read friends that you know deeply and love, is, what writer would have written the character that is you? Very quickly, you would join the limit of literature and confront its extreme specificity and the strangeness of character as lived. But then you have to push past that because, in fact, there is something beyond it. Thank you. And now I'll introduce Edgar Kunz.
I want to fuck and kill everyone. That was amazing. Hey, I feel really glad to be here with all of you. I put a book out this spring, so I'm going to read some poems from that, and then I'm going to read some brand new poems, which will be scary, but good for me. The first poem in the book is called After the Hurricane. It used to be much longer and have a lot to do with a hurricane, and then I cut all the stuff about the hurricane, so the title doesn't make any sense anymore, and that's how I start the book. After the hurricane. 300 miles north, my father beds down in a van by the Connecticut River. Snow tires rim deep in the silt. He has a wool horse blanket tacked inside the windshield. A pair of extra pants bunched into a pillow. He has a paper bag of partially smoked butts, a paw socks cap, a Zippo. He has state-sponsored cell phone minutes and a camo jacket hung on the side view to dry. He can see the Costco parking lot through the trees, swelling and emptying out. He wants to fix things with his wife. He wants a couch to crash on. He wants a drink. He wants sex. He has a few cans of kidney beans and a tin of ShopRite tuna. Wrinkled plastic piss bottles line the dash. Sometimes he walks out to the river and lets the wind sift his lank and matted hair. Sometimes he peels his socks and stands in the murky current and thinks about his wife, the birthmark on her neck, her one toe longer than the others, her freckled hands. He tries to hold her hands in his mind. He tries to remember the birth years of his sons. He tries to make sense of the papers he signed, the icy water wetting the hem of his pants, the river stone sharp underfoot, the wind. I hold him like this in my mind all afternoon. Graduation. When you showed up drunk as hell, humming tunelessly to yourself and slumped against the auditorium's faux wood paneling. When you fumbled in the pockets of your coat, fished out a cigarette, brought it to your lips, then, realizing for the first time where you were, tossed it away and said, "Fuck it," loud enough that everyone turned in their seats and a friend elbowed me and asked if I knew you. I shook my head and spent the next hour wondering why I was so glad you came. You who slept each night in your battered van, who skipped meetings and lied to your sponsor, who still called your ex-wife every day, restraining order be damned. You shouldn't have been there either. 100 yards was the agreement after you gathered all the meds in the house into a shoebox and threatened to take them. You had come regardless. You were there. And I was there. And when I walked the stage, you hollered my name with a kind of wild conviction, then said it a second time, less convinced. And I thought of that night when the cops came and you, unashamed of the fuss you caused, of your desperate public struggle for happiness, kissed me on the head once, twice, and went quietly. So the book moves from childhood into adulthood, early adulthood, and from the East Coast to the West Coast. I grew up in New England, and I moved out to California, which was a great decision. I just moved back to the East Coast, and I regret it terribly. So some of the later poems in the book are about California. I'm going to read one of those now. It's called Interim. Does everyone know what Bitcoin is? Cool. Interim. On the glassed-in back porch of a friend's house on Folsom, I slept 3 weeks on a heap of patterned wool blankets, a large Ziploc of granola and a jar of pistachios on the sill. I woke to bus traffic in the floorboards and sun on my face, drank thin coffee and scoured the listings for a studio someplace more possible. Each day, nothing. And each day I paced the bright, narrow side streets with my friend who was taking time off and who was an expert in digital currencies. I'd tell him about the collapse of my marriage, and he'd tell me about the distant servers that mine electronic coins by solving complex equations, the specialized equipment required for this kind of work. I would ask him basic questions, and he would answer patiently. The coins are encrypted code. The code is the currency. Value is determined by speculation. Those days, every detail had the glimmer of potential cruelty. Hot pink curtain caught in a shut window. Drain pipe signed King Baby in whiteout pen. Paper bag of potatoes rotting in the trunk of the car I borrowed to retrieve a crate of books from storage. I called a man about a place above a Thai restaurant and lied about how much I make in a year. He was from Pittsburgh. We talked about rain. He said he'd call later to tell me if I got it. On another walk, I asked my friend more questions. Will it replace cash? Yes. Is it untraceable? Yes. What happens when they run out of equations? A bus hummed past, skimming the lowest branches of the ficus tree, giving us shade. It's not like that, he said. It could go on forever. So I've only been able to write 2 poems since the book came out. I'm going to read both of them now. They're in kind of a different style. They're unpunctuated, and they have this kind of tumbling energy. So I'm going to read them accordingly. And unsurprisingly, they're both about California. The first one's called Day Moon. In the weeks after I left, I waited for someone, a friend, or her herself to walk quickly up to me on the bus or in the artisanal coffee shop and slap my face, spit on my hands, call me a bastard, a real motherfucker. By weeks, I mean the better part of a year. And by waited, I mean I wanted to be revealed by some visible sign of my wretchedness, a welt to ride the ledge of my cheekbone through the shit-spackled streets of San Francisco, a city ruined by money and incomparably beautiful. It didn't come, and I grew desperate. I stared too long at strangers at Safeway. I bought boxes of clementines and ate them like a possum on the train, cramming the rinds in the gap between the seat and the wall. I drank dark beer. I made no calls. I sat on a hot metal bench by a briny lake and tried to imagine the lives of the joggers passing in front of me, their joys, their sicknesses and regrets. It was melodramatic. I was useless. I thought of my friend who wrote a novel over a long winter in Nova Scotia, read it once, and buried it in the copse of birches behind the house. He chose the spot, he said, for its plainness, so he couldn't remember later and dig it up. And in this way, one medicated season slid into the next without incident. Gardenia bloom, persistent sun. I fell in love with the perfect voice of a Midwest radio DJ from a station I streamed on my phone. Called in one request after another, Petty, Bowie, Prince. I fell in love with a video of Stevie Nicks singing backstage to her makeup artist. Thin cotton dress, their harmonies breezy and immaculate. I woke around noon to the thup-thup of helicopters, went out in my underwear and found a fine black powder settling on the windowsills, dusting the parked cars, a day moon suspended in orange haze. It turned out a man who would go months without getting caught was methodically burning the half-built condo complexes one by one. 1 in 10,000 residents is a billionaire, the same article told me, though I could be forgiven for thinking the headlands were on fire again. The intervals between such disasters collapsing, I caught my neighbor's eye, who was stretching on her stoop in a fantastic powder blue tracksuit. What a world, I said, and she didn't seem to hear, and jogged down the steps and across the narrow street, that stubborn moon behind her rising or sinking or neither. It was hard to know which, and still is. This is the last poem I'll read. Thanks for being so cool. Night Heron. What now? You'd flown in from a Midwest city named for its rowdy summertime abundance, lying, saying you were coming to visit friends in San Francisco, and I had taken the train from chilly Oakland to meet you, and we rode north, carefully not touching. I took you to the tiny one-room apartment I had escaped to after a bad breakup and fried us nervously some potatoes in a cast-iron pan, a little rosemary, which we did not eat, because you kissed me hard, and we went in a rush to the mattress I bought off a guy in a semi-famous band, and had only the day before gotten off the floor and onto the pine wood bed frame I'd found and hoisted on my back and carried down out of North Berkeley, weaving through the side streets, towing the center line to avoid snagging the Buckeyes leaning out. It was about suffering in public. It was dramatic, sure, but the dramas of my life those days were pitched as high as I could stand, higher sometimes. I said, breathless, I want to taste you. And you said, please, Yes, and later, at the edge of the lake, huddled against the damp wind, hot grease soaking through a paper bag, licking salt from each other's fingers obscenely, a night heron peered up at us from the reeds, small, hunched, dipping its shining beak in the shallows, not particularly beautiful, but a heron, nevertheless, the same one we were sure we saw perched on the awning outside the theater, whose marquee shouted slogans like, "We live in a fake democracy," and "Prevent unwanted presidencies," with hand-counted paper ballots. And later, the cabin we rented for a weekend with friends in Calaveras, snow melt vaulting the redwoods to magnificent heights, drinking rye whiskey, and each of us practicing our best wolf howl at the waxing moon, which was silly, yes, but once we started, it became impossible to stop. Waking up next morning, hoarse and happy, and later you moved west. And we lived together in a ground floor apartment anyone walking past could see into, and later my father died, at an almost the same age yours did, and both from drink and an unnameable sadness. I went back to Connecticut alone. 3.5 days, my mother said, before anyone had found him in his apartment on the far side of town, and going with my brother, which we should not have done, and clearing the maggots off the ceiling with a shop vac, and so on, and later, you came, and we walked through the basement of my mother's house. I wanted to show you where for a while he lived and how, and you slung your arm around my waist, and we moved slowly together, bare, fluorescent bulb shining on the Anheuser-Busch ashtray, the carpentry tools I would inherit, the ratty couch he crashed on for years. You held up an old Belafonte Calypso record he loved and sang out softly, "Jump in the line, rock your body in time," and I sang back softly, "Okay, I believe you," dancing a little together in the musty half-light, and after a while, Mom at the top of the stairs shouting, "What are you kids doing down there?" And climbing the steps, you pinch my elbow and ask, "Are you okay?" And I hear myself say yes, which is not a lie, though I'm not listening. I'm letting myself feel how astonishing what our love can make of a place like that. Thank you. Next up is Jesus Valles.
Just point microphone at your mouth. I'm really loud, so you've noticed. I'm going to be reading from Undocuments, which is it's a solo show that I wrote in 2018 in response to, one, changing government immigration policy, two, I was brought to the United States when I was 9. I lived my life undocumented for a number of years. My brother, who was also undocumented, obviously lived with us. The show is largely about the trajectory of these two brothers, one who became a naturalized citizen, myself, and the other who was deported in 2009. The show is pieced together from questions from government forms, poems, and short stories that I developed in response to his deportation. So this is Undocuments. And I'll be reading from the beginning and then one small section from the very end to just sort of closure or something. I don't know. In Mexico, the name is Rio Bravo. Fierce, wild, brutal, full of teeth almost. Bravo. The gringos call it grande. Just big, just a matter of size, something to be brought down, a menu item at some coffee place. The wound between two countries, a cut, 1,885 miles long. The river, the dirt, a bridge, a fence, a wall. I've been looking at the border for a long time now, asking the question, is that a promise or a threat? Start here. Type or print in black ink. Note, if your biological mother or father is a U.S. citizen by birth or was naturalized before your 18th birthday, you may already be a U.S. citizen. Question, are either of your parents United States citizens? No. Residentes. It's 1985. And your father is too drunk And meaning some woman he's too drunk to recognize at some dance. And your mother is tired from a work week cleaning other people's homes. And there is drinking and dancing and cumbia and banda and norteñas. And your father is too drunk to notice that the woman he's dancing with right now, your mother, is not the woman he's actually supposed to be meeting with. And later in life, you are going to do the same fuckboy shit too, but we're not there yet. And there is drinking and dancing and cumbia and banda, and your mother is too charmed. Ay, Gerardo, ya. And when you're as tired as she is, why chase perfect when happy is good enough? And there is drinking and dancing and cumbia and banda and Suddenly her vomit is on his shoes, and she is embarrassed, and he is too drunk. Ya déjame. And then there is a car ride home, and there you are in the womb. It's 1986. And your parents live in Ciudad Juarez, but they work in El Paso like so many people, and they are not married yet, but you are on the way. And your father works del otro lado. And the winter is hard in 1986, and the river is cold, so your father strips naked, and he holds his clothes above his head before crossing the river, because if his clothes are wet, they'll freeze onto his skin when he makes it to work. And your mother's belly is already stretching with you. She crosses the rio on an inner tube. It flips. She's in the rio now. And a womb wrapped in a river is the primary condition for a covenant. You will return to me again and again. You will know my waters again and again. The current gives up your mother, and then you. And it's 1986, and your parents are about to become residents because it's 1986, and Ronald Reagan is a merciful monster, and citizenships are volatile fictions. And then it is 1987, and here you are, too soon. Last name, Valles Morales. First name, Jesus. Middle name, Ivan. Country of citizenship, Mexico. Country of nationality, Mexico. At the exact moment of your birth, your mother is a resident of the United States delivering the body of a Mexican. One side of the river makes you a thing you are not on the other. You understand this because by the time you are 5, she tells you she wishes she just waited to have you there. No, es que si te hubiera tenido allá, hubiéramos batallado menos. Would have been easier for her not to have to ford the river with you back and forth on an inner tube anytime she didn't have a babysitter. You understand this because by the time you are 6, you've crossed the river with her enough times to know that you do not belong there. Your home is here, Ciudad Juarez, Calle Pablo Elecidar, dirt roads and desert, and you can see the other side. When you are 7 and too big for the inner tube, she coaches you for the bridge. Cuando lleguemos al puente, les dices American. And you don't recognize her mouth? Not Spanish, but something from like Disney movies. It was the first spell you ever cast, and you are happy to practice. American. You lie. American. Folded hands. Cross-legged. Good boy. American. It was the first lie you ever told another man. You liked it. Part 2, application type or filing category. I am applying to register lawful permanent residence or adjust status to that of a lawful permanent resident based on the following immigration category. Section 1A, other relative of a U.S. citizen. Question, are you the immediate relative of a U.S. citizen? It's 1995 and your youngest sister is on her way. And this time, your legal resident mother crosses the bridge once again. And now, at the brink of water breaking, through the simple act of crossing a river through a few yards of concrete, the Mexican child inside of your mother's womb leaves her body a citizen of the United States, just like that. Their first citizen baby, La Dania, Chiquita, Loquita. 2 legal resident parents, 1 newly born citizen child, and you, nothing, a no thing, a thing to be made. It's 1995, and the Juarez you grew up in was changing, and you were old enough to know the news that the men in the city are swallowing the women, and the desert is vomiting up their hairs and bone, and And you were too old and too young to know what a corpse looks like when the meat is devoured and the sun bleaches the bone, but here it was anyway. The first naked woman you ever saw was your mother. The second was a hooked hanged corpse, and she was all gritted teeth and fire-wrecked sternum. And your parents are tired of crossing back and forth to work, and they don't want to raise another daughter here. They want to leave Mexico. An easy feat for two residents and their citizen baby, but you are a nothing. You are a thing without embossed holograms or serial numbers. And what do you think would happen to you, if they caught on to you? Who would the citizen baby belong to? Your parents or the country that claimed her at birth? And one day, your father hollows out the seat of his pickup truck, and all of your things are packed in the back of this red Chariot, and you don't know that you're leaving for a long time, forever. You feel longing. You cry while your father places you inside of the seat and stuffs it with blankets. Shh, duérmete. So you dream of your body not wedged in cushion or flatbed, and you feel a few stop signs, and you hear the agent ask them for their papers. American, you mouth from inside the seat. You're through. Across. Aquí. Now you are a something with no papers. You are an I. I am here, undocumented. We came here first to a place of neon lights, lucky 7-Eleven. The first American soil my feet ever touched was a convenience store. There were so many lights, so much candy here. There were so many colors, magazines, Reese's cups, and bubble tape, and beautiful Americans, and beautiful things. And there was Fran Drescher on the cover of a People magazine. My Lady Liberty in red sequins and high up to, I'm Mr. Sheffield. Bring me a tired, you're poor, you're hot up masses, yearning to be free. America was a promise like the one I'd seen on the television. It was a house like the one on The Nanny, so white, a white house. I wanted to collapse that international bridge in my mouth. I wanted to crush continents with crisp. Magician, I smoked and mirrored every inch of softness out of my tongue. Watch as the amazing immigrant fools his classmates into thinking his home is here. Watch as he stretches his mouth wide in ways his parents cannot. Watch as he turns his mouth into a visa. The darkness in my mouth, the dark space between the two rows of my teeth, it's a hyphen, a black line between one time and two lives. A chasm that splits a family apart each time I forget one more word in Spanish, mispronounce another word in English. What treacherous thing, a tongue. Once, in 6th grade, a guidance counselor asked me, where did you go to school before this? We don't have anything on record for you. I opened my mouth and nothing came out. And I wished hard that nothing would come out, because a piece of paper, its absence, would have collapsed the entirety of my 11-year-old world, all of it collapsing in my mouth, cinders on my tongue. I cried in front of the counselor but said nothing. She let me go. Even in El Paso, I didn't want anyone to know I didn't have papers. My parents had worked really hard to train me, to coach me. American means to be quiet. Calladito. Not too much. Not too loud. Years ago, in an archive somewhere, in a file folder, a ream of white and black ink stains my name, country of origin, place of birth. None of them sound anywhere like here. In a file somewhere, the metrics of a lifetime, the merits of citizenship unfurl, judgment between the pages, calculating the time you lived here. How long ago? Where? When did you get here, and why? Sin papeles, we say, without papers. But really, the term is wrong. We are painful libraries of nothing but papers, oceans of thin cuts on the skin we lost along the way here. And here, it is how we live, every step filed, recorded, alphabetized. And before they raid workplaces, don't they build files too? In this country, isn't there always some piece of paper with our names on it, threatening a safety you think is possible, a fiction you lust for? And I'd like to imagine an undoing, a less painful way to papers, a visa, a passport, a birth certificate, a driver's license, a green card, and why? When we are dead, we will leave behind our mountains of bills, our leases, our loan applications, our past due notices, our names on multiple envelopes we never opened. But I'd like to imagine that we will also leave behind our longings, our poems, our prayers, the notes we passed to each other in class, the bullshit we scrawled along the walls, and those are documents too. Proof we were here once. And why? A few years back, at the age of 58, my father became a US citizen. For a brief second, my father and I understood each other as two people belonging to a graveyard we'd never fully feel comfortable calling home. He has a tiny American flag now too in his sock drawer just like me. Where do you keep the thing given to you by the very agency that took away your son, your brother, his, mine? I ask him what he'll do now that he's a gringo. He laughs. Pues nada, seguir trabajando. Nothing, he says. Keep working. ¿Qué más nos queda, verdad, papá? Y seguir.